All right, everybody, welcome back. Yeah, things have escalated. So I have basically forgotten to film 95% of this whole process, and that's typical. Not great, but typical. So what you will see is there's a Mark III gauge cluster in place here. I obviously don't have the bezel in, but it fits pretty good. I need to get the mount tabs out of a Mark III dash just to hold that in place firmly. The heater control, the fan speed at least, is connected. I do have a heater valve in here. Temperature control works, vent and heater, these two controls to the heater box, not hooked up yet, still working on that. Customer said he didn't care much about heat. I do, so we're going to put it in. OBD plug is in place. Need to find a holder for it or get one out of the Mark III. Door switch is rewired. It's got a Mark IV dome light in it now. That's all wired, so both doors work with the dome light switch. That's pretty cool. And you'll notice that he had a Braille 15-pound battery. That is now mounted to the back wall of the truck. We're using an E36 battery cable and most of the factory fusebox feed, and then a stock Mark III ground. And that's grounded to the body. So that's pretty cool. Everything runs under the carpet. It's nice and tidy. You will notice we have some danglers here. You won't notice anything because you can't see. So let me get you some light. There we go. Okay. So it may look a little clustery because we're close to it, but that's a radio antenna that we're not using. That's just kind of hanging out. This is here tentatively. Otherwise, we have the Mark III fuse box in place where it's going to live. And obviously, it's a little hard to see the fuses and the relays, but it's all in there. It's all connected. And we have basically every plug because something went to everything. So what you'll see here is we have Mark III column electronics in entirety. So that is the lock cylinder out of a Mark III. We swapped over the key tumbler for the Mark I into the Mark III housing. And to do that, you actually have to drill it out a little hole so you can get to the release. But that works like it's supposed to. The entire column harness is from a Mark III ignition switch, wiper stalk, turn signal stalk. Super easy. That actually worked really well, and it makes the hazard light switch work. So this switch does not. Anyhow, what you'll notice underneath here is we have 3 danglers. Clutch switch, which we need to start it, which will either get bypassed or I'll fit it into the pedal. One way or the other, it'll be fine. Got the brake light switch, which I have spliced in the original plug to use the original switch, which will go into the brake pedal, which, as you may notice, isn't connected to anything because we have a little problem with the manual brakes. And for everyone else who's going to do this swap, Mark IIIs have an alarm system. And that alarm system always breaks, so you definitely don't want to put it in. I mean, you might, but I wouldn't. This is the main power feed that goes through the alarm system. So if you don't put an alarm in, this comes from the main engine harness. This would go to the alarm system. You have to connect these wires or you will not get power out where you need to. Otherwise, everything is as it was. We've got a ground over here just like stock would be. And yeah, pretty straightforward. I know it doesn't seem straightforward, but it really is. Everything's wrapped up and tucked out of the way. There's a couple things I want to clean up. This isn't entirely permanent, but it's good. We also, if you see down here, we have a Tech 53 steering column doohickey, and that reminds me I got to tighten this. That'd probably be a good idea to do. But that'll hold the new column bearing in place, and everything will be honky-dory. But otherwise, this is just zip tied for now, but I'm going to get Mark III clips for it to hold it in, and that'll be good. So as it stands, the truck is basically wired. I haven't fired it yet, but the lights all work. The heater blower works. I've tested all that. The gauges that live up here for boost water temperature and oil pressure, they all work. The only thing that doesn't work is this stupid wideband is Innovate. I don't really like it, and I have to get it working correctly, but we'll deal with that nonsense later. All right, so let's head outside the truck real quick, and we'll look at what we have left to do. See, that looks pretty solid. When the instrument cluster bezel is in place, it actually cuts off right about here. So in typical Volkswagen fashion, if you had a check engine light, you wouldn't have to see it. How convenient. But yeah, let's go look at the engine bay, because that is where a lot of progress has been made. Much has changed here. So you will notice we have the Mark IV manifold as I showed before. However, now it's painted and all of the charge pipes are connected. The radiator is not totally fixed in place. I have to make one bracket here to hold it in, or have something here so we can use the stock paper clip jobby do. Regardless of all that, let's take the cover off here and we'll talk about what I've done, since I've really glossed over this entire project, and I apologize. Pop this off. Whoop, okay. So, under here, we have 440cc injectors. They were already with the car. They work good. So as part of this Mark IV manifold swap, you will have a problem with your Mark III injectors. They are too short. So what you will want to do is make a spacer, either using stacked washers or what I found off of actually bevel washer doohickeys that allow you to angle the pads on the little V-arms for your bike. Just the right size. There's one under here and there's one under here, and it forms a perfect spacer, so it puts the O-ring at the perfect depth on the lower manifold so you don't have a vacuum leak, and that's fantastic. So bracket we cut off in the previous episode, and so is the other one. They're all painted now and installed, which is what was holding the cover on so beautifully. If you'll notice, I also shaved the nub that is on top of these throttle bodies if you flip them over, because it's ugly and I don't like it, and now it's gone, and that's great. And you'll also see all these bolts have been wire wheel polished. They're not going to be perfect, but daggone they look better. I did so much and didn't show anybody anything. So, brake booster, deleted. We got manual brakes. I need to get the push rod fixed because the original push rod had an offset eyelet that clipped onto a post, whereas this is supposed to straddle the brake pedal and have a post go through it, or a bolt, pin, whatever. No biggie. It is a problem. We'll deal with it. As you will see, I have a festival of hose clamps attaching the heater core over here to the water valve and our turbo water line. So what I did here is, this is the shutoff valve for the heater water. So when this is closed, water will still go through the turbocharger as opposed to, it won't deadhead any of this. And when it's open, it should run in parallel. If it doesn't, I will figure it out then. But for the time being, I think that's going to be just fine and dandy. You may recall in the last video how big this charge pipe was that I removed. What was done is this pipe was cut off right about here, and a simple 45-degree silicone coupler is the end of it, and it goes right to the throttle body. What I learned is that a Mark III OBD1 throttle body has a 2 3/4 outer diameter on it, where the intake boot would attach, whereas a Mark III OBD2 throttle body is a simple 2.5. And boy, does that make things easier. So that's what we did. Easy peasy. And that fits beautifully. I'm really happy with how a lot of this came out. You will see the harnesses here. So main engine loom coming out from the fuse box, 12-volt main power wire, and this is actually the triplet gauges they're wiring. It just worked out better this way, and then that all runs along the frame rail here and comes across. And I haven't finalized this yet, but the headlight harness is in, and that's attached. And we have that hooked up just like a Mark III would be, with the barrel connector, and that's all fine and dandy. Plugs are in for that. That all tucks to the side. I just have to, I actually got to unwrap this and tee in to the marker lights for the bumper markers, because this has bumper marker lights, obviously, because if it didn't, wouldn't be tapping into them. So, what else can we talk about on this? Oh, okay. Let's think. You'll see, there we go. Something you may have noticed over here, the battery tray, it's gone. I drilled it out. I went a little deep on a couple spots. I'm not super happy with it, but the customer's thrilled that it's gone, and we are going to go ahead and fix that. This whole truck's going to get painted eventually, but that'll get tidied up and good enough for right now, since it'll get redone later. Anyways, what else can we talk about? I know what we'll talk about. Let's talk charge piping. I complained about the intake earlier. This might be a little hard to see, but we've made some revisions here. It comes in tight on the timing belt, but it's nowhere near where it was. And you'll notice I actually managed to fit a timing belt cover on here from the respective AEG. Clips right on the manifold. Looks great. Diverter valve piping I still have to finish up, and I do still have to get this plugged, but we're getting close. Got a throttle body cable on here, a throttle cable hooked up. Needs to be finalized as far as position goes, but if you are doing an ABA swap in a Mark I, the correct throttle cable for this is from a Mark II or an S2 Scirocco with a 16 valve gas engine. It gives you I think it's 1,047 or 1,042 millimeters long. Basically, it's a 42-inch long cable. So it can come out here, come across, double back, and go right like that into the stock holder, which I don't have attached. But what I do have is, remember that port I said was on the back of here? Well, guess what? We aren't going to use the Mark III intake air temp sensor because there's nowhere on the manifold to put it. So I ripped that port out, reamed it out with a bigger drill bit, and that's where we're putting a Mark IV open air style intake air temp sensor. So that should be way more responsive, give us accurate intake air temps as the air is actually entering the plenum versus, well, just a heat-soaked sensor that lives in the plenum. So that should be a lot better. Under the cowl tray, we have the ECU mounted up, and that's mounted with a single bracket. Sits right here. Got the O2 sensor plugs attached to the ECU, so it keeps them out of the way. And this I need to clean up and shorten. Otherwise, the harness for the ECU is mounted in place. It wraps around, so I didn't have to cut and loop anything and risk electrical problems later. It's all plugged in. I got the Reflect tuning chip from Ian Nelson down in North Carolina. That's in here for the 42-pound injectors, turbo software. We ought to be good to go, and that's pretty cool. So, other notables that we're going to cover real quick, and then ideally from here I will bring you in anytime I do something, which thus far I've forgotten to do. You may notice that this alternator, if you look at it, has a D-shaped plug on it. This is a Mark IV 2-liter alternator. Believe it or not, they fit exactly the same, but one critical difference is on a Mark III, the voltage regulator / exciter plug is right here, and that would hit this shroud on the on the radiator. So I had to get a Mark IV alternator to flip this sucker in here, and then there's our power wire which goes over to the starter. Effectively, we're ready to fire this thing. I got to put some gas in it. We just installed the charge and the intake piping. The intake pipe fit terribly. I hated it. This pipe wasn't so bad. It actually fit up just fine to the old intake manifold, but obviously the throttle was here, not over here. So the only things that we need to do down here are going to be adjust this port, which I had the fabricator put it on like this. I should have had it angled down because the diverter valve fouls into the manifold. But basically, man, this is hard to see because it's all black, but basically what will happen is this is going to sit tucked over here, out of the way, and go right on top of the intake pipe, which puts it nice and far from the mass airflow sensor, so it should not get upset. And if you look carefully, you will see the intake pipe snakes past the throttle body with a little zigzag, goes up to a 3-inch into the mass airflow sensor, and then you have a filter, and that's about all she wrote for that. So that'll do it for this one today on this third installment of the Rabbit Truck Build. If you are enjoying this series in its minimal detail, please hit the like button, consider subscribing if you're not already, and stay tuned for the fourth installment where we will get a little bit more work done and continue to go down the, no pun intended, rabbit hole. So thanks for watching, everybody. Take care, and I'll see you soon.